Hi, this is a route to value explainer series around the sales objectives. Chapter 1, Sales Process Assumptions. Our mission with our routes to value program is to improve close rate, decrease sales cycle time, and increase deal size. In order for us to do this, we need to understand the basics of sales interactions and what are the elements of it. Really, all sales interactions start with an action taken by a rep or an action taken by a customer. There's workflow associated with that action, workflow preparing for it or workflow afterwards. There's an exchange of information during that interaction. There are responses to each action or each inquiry. There's a decision made, a yes or no decision made on the customer's part. There's confirmation that that action happened. All of these things are going to happen, whether they're scripted or not. All of these things have a lot more meaning or a lot more focus if there's a purpose. And that purpose, we need to make sure is clear. That purpose is at a moment in time and between people. Now, when we think about sales process, and most people think about sales process, they think about all of those interactions happening in one conversation between one person. And the whole idea is to do lots and lots and lots of those conversations, those interactions. The belief is if you have more of these events, then more money you'll make. That's a focus. So that creates this huge amount of pressure and perspective around volume. So one of the things that's common, and this is a standard sales methodology that a lot of companies use, that's 5 stages, is a belief that for us to control that sales cycle, those sales interactions, and we want to have more of them and manage them, we have a stage where we prospect, there's a stage of qualifying, there's a stage of needs assessment, there's a stage of proposal, and deals. And all of these have assumed expected win values or win probabilities for each one. If you've got a well-prospected opportunity, you stick it at 10% and so on and so forth. And these events happen over time. We're going to use this construct all throughout the routes to value sales objectives explainer series so we can understand what happens in each one of these steps and what it is that we're after for our program. So in order to do this, in order to figure out the math and how we're going to pull the levers to get the increased deal size, shorter sales cycle times, better win rates, we need to baseline. So let's build a baseline off of this particular model. Let's assume that a prospect, the first meeting conversion rate is about 3%, which is really high in reality. And that the conversion rate from a qualified opportunity to actually that client spending the time to do a needs assessment is 10%. And that the conversion rate after a needs assessment to actually putting a proposal in front of them is about 30%. And then let's say that the conversion rate from proposal to deal is 50%. Each one of these conversion rates are important. Most companies, these conversion rates are spread out because different groups own different parts of that process. But when you collapse all of these things, this is basically what happens. So that means in order to get one deal, you're going to have 2 proposals. You're going to need to have 6 needs assessments, 60 qualified opportunities, and 2,000 prospects. Now, when we put this into the math of the reality of an individual salesperson, let's say the average deal size is $20,000. The quota is $500,000, and the total deals required to hit that target by the end of the year is 25. So let's break that down and break down these numbers and see the workflow and the activity required. What are the volume numbers? Let's do some accounting. So what do we know? We know we need 25 deals. That translates into a workload of 2 deals per month or half a deal a week, 1/10 of a deal a day. Okay, that sounds reasonable. We have to have 25 or 50 proposals. That's 4 per month, 1 per week, a quarter per day. So 1 per week, still manageable. We have to have 150 needs assessment conversations. That's 13 a month, 3 a week, 1 a day. That's a little bit more challenging. In terms of opportunities that we're qualifying, that means we've got to, at these conversion rates, we have to do 1,500 qualifies. That's 125 per month, 31 per week, 6 per day. That means the prospects that we need to have, or the leads, the incoming leads, conversations to have is 50,000 throughout the year, or 4,167 per month, almost over 1,000 per week, and 208 per day. Obviously, way overwhelming for this to work. But if we don't have the prospects at the top of the funnel, things don't matriculate all the way through. Let's put some time. Actually, the workload of a seller. What is the workload of a seller having to do? So, okay, you have 208. Let's just say you have 208 leads. How long is it going to take for them to process those? We'll have to check the email, because are they all going to come into a batch? Are they all going to be loaded immediately into their calling queue? No, there's going to be CRM checking their email. And then when they do make those calls, they're going to have to do CRM data entry. So in order to process, assuming 2 minutes of time per prospect, that's 416 minutes of workload that seller has. When you look at qualify, there's 60 minutes associated there of having the call, preparing for the call, and then actually doing the data entry to put the meeting notes into the CRM system. So with this workload, that's 360 minutes per day. Six qualified calls times 60 minutes is 360 minutes of workload. Then let's associate 90 minutes for needs assessment. So taking the time to write the different notes in, again, doing the CRM recording and figuring out which form that management wants to be filled out. That's 1 per day, 90-minute workload. Then we have the proposal time. So that's 300 minutes we're factoring in. So the writing, the internal sourcing, figuring out whether or not you've got the right resources, the pricing, all that other stuff. And the workload there is 75 minutes per day. And then 300 minutes to the actual deal, doing the negotiation, doing the follow-up, the back and forth with the legal team, those kinds of activities. There's 3 minutes of time there. When you add all of that time up, that's 971 minutes or 16 hours. Obviously, way too much time, and double the workload of any one seller to handle. So that's okay. Obviously, there's different roles probably contributing to these different things. So let's pick up the data that we've got here and look at this through a different lens. So if you look at this and say, hey, this kind of work here, the 416 minutes of the 971 and 16 total hours, let's say that's handled by either ADRs, a combination of ADRs, lead generation programs, overall general marketing, anything to get those leads coming in. That means the overall workload is still 9.25 hours. So still in excess of 100% of an 8-hour workday, but a lot more reasonable. And still, this is being busy and either on the phone or working on a deal 100% of the workday. So the other thing that we need to factor in is, so this is a reasonable workload of a seller, and then this is the stuff coming from other sources, even though there's still time that a seller needs to factor in. We need to calculate the cycle time to close this. So when will these deals actually happen? So the cycle time is really the duration between a prospect to qualify. So we get a prospect to happen. When will the customer respond? When will the meeting happen? For qualified and needs, how long does it take the salesperson to go from this point here to this point there? In the needs assessment to proposal, what is the duration of time required? So plotting this out, we cannot anticipate what the time duration is for time to initiate any kind of lead generation activity. So this is an unknown. So these could start at different times. But you have 5 days, say, on average for a prospect to respond with a meeting. Maybe there's 10 days between the qualify stage and the need stage. That's sort of the second meeting. Maybe there's 55 days in between the needs assessment and the proposal stage. And then there's 20 days of actually closing it. So in these assumption parts, the cycle time is 90 days. So let's factor this in terms of an overall calendar year. So the other factor of time is when these things are going to happen and when these processes are going to happen. So the reason that the cycle time is so important is you can figure out an overall workload batch. So how many opportunities is it likely for any salesperson to work at a given time? And looking at this clean, this is about 30. Looking at the workload from needs, proposed, and deals. And of this combined total, let's say about 20% of these needs, proposed, deal stage close. That gives us 6 deals per quarter, and their total workload time is 40% of their day is spent doing this, which gives them 60% of the day for prospecting the early stage at the earlier stages to build the funnel. Okay, so that cycle continues, and that cycle continues, and that cycle continues. And this is, again, assuming all of the assumptions about workloads that we shared. Given this execution, this real tight execution, that's 24 deals per year. So one shy at 100% maximum yield, one shy of what the target deal is. Now, this is assuming 100% operating efficiency, 8 hours of rep time spent driving customer-focusing tasks. In most time study analysis, it's really only about 34%. The remainder of the time is spent doing administrative work, trying to get answers, trying to figure things out, trying to get confidence to make calls, etc. So as we can see, the data that we've got here in terms of just a simple benchmark analysis, it's easy to make these statements about what stages are happening. But when you put the reality of time and the reality of what's actually happening within these stages, things become a little awry. So let's talk about what you can do to bend the needle, what levers to pull. Well, let's go back to what we talked about earlier, improving average deal size. For us to improve the average deal size from $20,000, we need to elevate the conversation. We need to be talking to people who've got more money. In order to improve the close rates, what we need to do is really concentrate on making very clear improvements here. If it's a prospect to qualified conversion rate from 3% to 5%, that's a huge return because everything downstream is better. Or from qualified to needs, let's say it's 10% to 20%. All of these are very possible if we shift our focus away from what we want to do and what would be valuable at each touch point for our customers. And finally, if we want to shorten sales cycles to go from 90 days to 60 days, say, what we need to do is concentrate on what are all those steps, all those workflow steps that are occurring, and let's eliminate unneeded steps. There's so much slack in the system to be able to improve. This is what our focal point is. So in order to do that, let's add value at each touch point. That's the right message. Let's elevate the conversation. Let's focus on the right person. And let's eliminate unneeded steps. Let's focus on the right actions with purpose. This is how we optimize each touch point. And this has been the primary focus of everything that we're doing associated with the Rouse to Value.